Alright guys, so we're going to start by learning a little bit about interval notation. So interval notation is just another way of writing inequalities. So inequalities are like things that you saw last year, such as x is less than 7, x is greater than or equal to 2. It's just a way to represent like a range of numbers. And so the new way that you would write that, if x is less than 7, then you're going to write it as like x goes from negative infinity to 7. Or for the x is greater than or equal to 2, that means you start at 2 and you go all the way to infinity. So, and then with the greater than or equal to, instead of putting that parentheses like I just put, you're actually going to replace the parentheses with a bracket. So last year you guys learned about like open and closed circles, I think. So brackets and parentheses are really similar. So with the closed circles like that, that means you actually use a bracket, or like an open circle on a number line means you would use parentheses. And I'm going to show you a little bit more on the number lines in a second. So with interval notation, one of the important things to remember is that it goes from negative infinity to positive infinity. So that means you're always going to want to write the smaller number first. So you'll have like a parentheses, you'll write the smaller number, and a lot of times that's going to be negative infinity. And then you go from the smaller number and you put a comma, and then you put the larger number. And then you close the parentheses. So that essentially means you're going from the first number to the second number is what that translates to. And then just another side note is anytime that you have an infinity or a negative infinity, you're not going to use brackets, you're always going to use parentheses. And that is just because with the brackets, you'd be using like a closed circle on a number line, meaning that the number is in the interval, and infinity is never going to be in any interval of numbers. So you're always going to use parentheses with infinities. So then I just want to do a couple of examples real quick, and then I'm going to let you guys do some practice on it. So my first example is -2 is less than x is less than 5. So that means x is in between -2 and 5. So my suggestion is when you see an interval like that, what I want you to do is draw a number line for it. And so there's two numbers that it gives us. One is -2 and one is 5. And then the x is going to be in between those two numbers. So we talked a little bit about open and closed circles. So in this case, there's not that bar under the less than and greater than signs. So since there's no bar, that means the numbers are not in the interval. And in that case, that means you use an open circle. So on -2 and 5, you're going to use an open circle. And then for your shading, since x is between those two numbers, you're going to shade in the middle. So this is what our number line for this would look like. So then what you kind of need to do when you're trying to write that in interval notation is you need to look at the shaded area. So the shaded area starts at the -2, so that's your smaller number, and it ends at the 5, so that's your larger number. Since they're open circles, that means I'm going to start with a parentheses, and then my smallest number on here is -2, and my largest number on here is 5. And then there's another open circle, so I'm going to close with a parentheses as well. I'm not going to use any brackets on that one. So then I'm going to come over here to x is less than or equal to 1, or x is greater than or equal to 6. So I'm going to start by just drawing another number line. And in this one, it gives us a 1 and a 6. So I'm going to start with the 1. It's less than or equal to that. And since it has that line, that equal to line, that means you're going to do a closed circle on that 1. So I'm trying to shade that in the best I can. And then it says that it's less than 1. So if it's less than, then it goes towards that arrow that it's given in there. So it needs to go towards the left. The arrow is pointing towards the left, so that's where I'm going to shade. So I'm shading this part right here, this whole side. So then with the 6, it has that line again, so that means I'm going to do another closed circle. And then this time the arrow is pointing towards the right, so I'm going to shade to the right. So now I'm going to start trying to write interval notation. So this time we shaded the arrow. So my kind of like trick is anytime you see an arrow, you need to think of a negative or a positive infinity. An arrow always points towards infinity. So if it's on the left-hand side of that number line, that's going to be a negative infinity. And if it's on the right-hand side of the number line, that's going to be a positive infinity. So then if you're asking, like, what is the smallest number that is shaded on that graph, then the smallest number is that negative infinity right there. So you're going to start with a parentheses, because infinities always use parentheses. You're going to do a negative infinity, and then you're going to do a comma, which means I'm going from negative infinity to a number. So I'm going from negative infinity to the next number is 1. So you're going to put a 1 right there. So you went from negative infinity to 1. That's just this interval right here that I'm shading a little bit more. So then you have a closed circle. And a closed circle means you want to include 1 in that interval. And so when you see a closed circle, you're going to put a bracket. So then the next thing is we have a break between 2 intervals. So we still need to include this interval right here from 6 up to infinity. So if you have one interval and then you want to include another one, then the symbol that you put in between them just looks like a little U. It's the symbol for a union, like I'm using both of these 2 intervals. And it's kind of like you're thinking of it like an and. And so you have from negative infinity to 1, and then you're going to start again at 6. So at 6, you have a closed circle. So since it's a closed circle, you're going to put another bracket. The smaller number in this interval is the 6. And then it goes all the way to that arrow on the right-hand side, and an arrow on the right-hand side means infinity. And then with an infinity, you always use parentheses. So that's just a couple of quick examples. We'll go over more of them for sure, but I wanted you to get familiar with the notation and just see how it works on a couple of them first. So hopefully this helps.